Whenever I'm giving advice to younger galleries, what I tell them is stay as small as you can for as long as you can. Don't buy into the growth model. Even if you've had a great year, put the money aside, save it. Don't let your ego get ahead of you.
I'm Kate Brown, and this is The Art Angle, a podcast from ArtNet News. We're on the cusp of the 2025 edition of Art Basel, the flagship fair in Basel, Switzerland, where each June more than 200 galleries from around the world gather to present work spanning the 20th and 21st centuries. Art Basel is both a bellwether and a bit of a battleground. Participation is prestigious, it's also expensive. It's a high-stakes game. And while that's always been true, what's newer is that there's a softening of the art market around this. Sales are a bit down, demand is cautious, buying patterns are changing. Quote unquote, uncertainty was the word last year, and it pretty much still is. So while the top of the market gets a lot of the headlines, I really want to talk about what's happening with the emerging tier, galleries who are selling under 250,000 or under 100,000, galleries that are spotting and raising new talent and pushing aesthetics forward. What does a win look like for these galleries right now? What does growth mean in this moment? And how does one survive in what is ultimately a contracting ecosystem? To unpack this, I'm joined by three dealers whose programs I've followed closely over the years and whose perspectives offer a real-time snapshot of what's at stake. I'm joined by Robbie Fitzpatrick, a dealer who has run galleries between Los Angeles and Paris and who recently made the decision to take his gallery nomadic. Robbie founded Art Basel Social Club, which we'll talk about today. It's an annual event, in short, that is a defiant alternative to an art fair, and it's become a key moment during the week in Art Basel. And I should add that Robbie was also a founder of Paramount Ranch in LA, which is in some ways a predecessor to Basel Social Club. Hi, Robbie. How are you doing? And I think I owe you congratulations on your most recent acquisition.
My little baby girl.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's been the biggest game changer of them all, but it has coincided with other changes, vocational changes as well. So big shifts in my life.
Nice. Great to have you on.
Thank you.
I'm also joined by Lisa Offerman, founder of Gallery Elsie Kaiser, which opened in 2018 in Tbilisi, Georgia. Lisa opened a second location in Cologne earlier this year, and she's done a few editions of Art Basel and is participating in one of its newest sectors, Premiere, this year. Hey, Lisa, how are you, and which gallery location are you dialing in from?
Hi, Kate. I'm very well, thank you. I'm in Tbilisi, which is our main kind of, if you would say, with our size, headquarters space. So, yeah.
Nice. How often are you going between the two?
We will figure this out this year, but we will be obviously more in Cologne during the year. And Cologne is something which is anyway for us a bit of a traveling point when we travel in Europe. So when we go to Paris or to, I don't know, anywhere else, to London in Europe, we always stay in between in Cologne to not travel so far between Georgia and forth and back. So
Transit hub.
Exactly.
And last but not least, we're joined by Freddie Powell, who's behind Ginny on Frederick, a gallery that opened in London in 2020 that I would say with its very sharp program rose the ranks really quickly and will be having its debut at Art Basel this year with a solo presentation by Alexandra Metcalf. Hey, Freddie, how's it going? I'm so glad to have you on here.
Hi, Kate. It's great to talk. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's get right into it. As I said, I've been following each of your programs. I'm a big fan of what you're each doing, and I think that your respective trajectories speak to different but overlapping issues and opportunities in the art market right now. So we have lots to speak about. But yeah, let's start with Art Basel because it's upon us. The previews are in everyone's inbox, and I'm excited to check out what you guys are bringing to the fairs next week. But let's pan out a bit. As I said at the top, this is the most competitive fair to get into, and it's this benchmark for galleries of all stripes. Particularly young and emerging galleries have a big chance here. It's the central node of the art market, and I really want to get into the myth and the hopes around it, but also the realities. Lisa, maybe we can start. You've shown in multiple editions of Art Basel. When did you first get accepted, and what was the impact for your program and also your business?
I think the first time we got accepted to Art Basel Paris emergent section in the first year of Art Basel Paris. I don't know exactly when that was, 21, 22. And yeah, it changed a lot for us. we receive a whole different reach to collectors we haven't met before, really. And that was possible through Basel, because I have the feeling with the fill of fairs, I mean, with this amount of fairs nowadays, certain people just decide to do Basel, and that's it, maybe nothing else. So, and I had the feeling all of a sudden in this circle, we kind of reached attention. So yeah, it changed a lot for us.
Yeah, let's talk in a minute about the return on investment that happens there. But maybe we can turn to you, Freddie. You're debuting this year. I'm curious, can you speak a bit about what the application process looked like for you and what access means for you, what you're expecting and what your artists are hoping for, how this kind of fits into your trajectory?
To echo what Lisa said, the fair landscape is so vast now, and we had kind of reached the point where we'd done the smaller and some of the bigger ones that we wanted to. So we sort of made a concerted effort to turn our head towards Basel for 2025. The application process wasn't much different to any of the others. We were just trying to find the right artist to show at the fair for it to be the right moment for them. So Alexandra Metcalf made a lot of sense.
Right.
The gallery was founded in 2020, but then it was COVID. So we actually only did one show and then we started again in September 2021. So really, it's September 2021 when we were project space, really. So still in the 3 or 4 years we're now navigating this, is every fair is kind of a fishing expedition in some ways. You kind of see what happens.
Right. And Robbie, you founded your gallery back in 2013 and you've done many of these fairs. And in 2022, you opted out. You decided not to do the Basel fairs anymore. And then you started your own platform. Can you talk about this decision? And was there a tipping point where the costs of doing the fair outweighed the benefits?
Well, we opted out because of decisions that were outside of our control, actually. So we were accepted into the statement section of Art Basel 2 years prior in 2018, and then in 2019. The gallery did go through a shift where my former business partner stepped away from the gallery and I rebranded in 2020. But we got waitlisted then for statements and were considering bringing our project to Lista when we realized that it just didn't make sense there. So that's when the decision was made to still do something in Basel. And I felt, together with a few colleagues, there was an opportunity to do something quite radical, a completely new model, which we presented for the first time with the inaugural edition of Basel Social Club in 2022. This year's Basel Social Club takes place at a former private bank. So what could be more Swiss than private banking, especially at a time when there's, tariff wars and the recession discussion, or an impending recession. We do have a really fun opportunity to play with that in both a satirical way, but also addressing questions that are real, primarily dominated by the topics around the market.
There's a mixture of curatorial projects, but then gallery projects. It's not just galleries presenting work, right?
It's huge this year. There are 150 participating exhibitors with several hundred artists, multiple special projects, all sorts of interactive experiences and bars. And there's a casino, there's a sauna, you can get your hair cut. You could spend the entire week at Basel Social Club this year and still not experience everything. Definitely our biggest year so far. And Freddie, we're sad you couldn't participate, but Lisa, we're of course grateful that you're loyal to the project as a returning exhibitor. Freddie, we'll get you next year.
I know, my first Basel, I need to focus.
Yeah, no, of course.
Yeah.
No, you have an expensive...
I'll be there next year.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Were you expecting it to be so well received? It really feels like it filled a need that was there for some fresh air.
You know what? Yes, I did. I have been going to Basel for years with the former gallery. Freeman Fitzpatrick did Lista 4 years and Statements 2 years. But it always felt like there was a space that was missing, a hangout space. And that was really where we started from. It wasn't about another fair. It was never meant to be a project that was in competition to Lista. It was about providing a social space. And that's at the heart of the project and the ethos of what we do.
You touched on this a bit. There's a sort of graduation program unofficially where you go to Lista for a few years and then you go to statements. I think all of you have passed through this to some extent. And then after you do statements a few times, I guess the plot is that you're supposed to go into the main section, but that's not really what happens. Can you guys speak a bit about maybe just broadly what you experience with your colleagues? Maybe one of you can take this. This is not exactly how it always works for people.
Growth is something that is expected of galleries and artists. You grow with your artists, your space grows, your art fair booth grows. And in a lot of ways, I think that growth expectation actually can create the challenges that a lot of galleries end up facing, especially when they're maybe at an age like my gallery, like a 10-year benchmark point, where the demands of the growth are very difficult to oversee, especially when you grow at a time when the market is solid and good, and then suddenly the market slows down. But you're faced with the overhead that you've set up for yourself during that more healthy market period. I say that because one of the things that the fairs themselves sort of groom you to believe is join the fair and grow with us. But the growth is also a huge challenge. The statements booth is one cost, but the premier booth is another. The main booth cost is really a turning point. Can you sustain enough sales to cover the cost of doing it? You look at certain examples of galleries that unfortunately have gone out of business, and the timing of when they've done so, it does actually coincide often with exactly that turning point when they've graduated to the main section of the fair.
For sure. You guys have lower price points compared to a lot of the galleries that are showing at Basel, these mid-tier and high-tier galleries. So in a way, these costs are a lot more to bear. Like, Lisa, maybe you can speak a bit about that because you're now in Premier, which I understand is a little bit more expensive than statements. And we're facing this market where there's this big discussion about art prices maybe needing to go down.
Premier as well as statements are the special sections where you have to come up with a conceptual program to be let in, and your booth have to be a little bit more conceptual and how you say, maybe difficult in terms of being approachable by collectors. Just to give an example, the first statement booth, we did a massive installation by Tulia Stachishvili, and the only insurance we had was Robbie, actually, Basel Social Club. I mean, this was the insurance to survive this because I think we had costs of, like, with everything together, like 35,000 or 40,000, and this is massive for a young gallery. I mean, this you have to bring in, so you have to bring something which is double the price, kind of. And for a gallery our age, not many have this kind of position which they can sell. And now it became even rarer to have this kind of position because not many collectors are willing to pay that kind of money. Anyway, so everything worked out, but that's how you have to approach these projects, in like finding an insurance so you kind of will survive this. Mm-hmm. And now Premier is more expensive. I'm kind of a fan of this sector because it's something in between young galleries and mid-career galleries, something where you can play a bit more, because it's very hard to find a statement position. You don't always have this young emerging artist you can bring. So this is something in between, but I think we will still pay a lot of money for this. So yeah, let's see. Let's see how this will work out.
Freddie, you entered into owning a gallery in the middle of a pandemic. And I know there was like a frothy year sort of after that. But then, pretty soon after that, things started to really plateau. So I guess you've had no kind of myths that you were carrying from the onset. And you also used to work in a gallery. I believe you ran the bookshop at White Cube. So how did you take from what you saw of the art industry before you decided to open a gallery, and how did you apply it to your business model, which has been going, it seems, very well within 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always talk about it being somewhat accidental. I think that's a common story, actually, because I was showing friends, and then those friends have gone on to do really well, and Project Space became, quote unquote, a real gallery. And I think fairs have been part of that growth the whole time, because Yes, I worked at White Cube, but I was very in the bookshop. It was an amazing job, but I didn't take clients from that into Ginny on Frederick. So fairs at the beginning were a way for me to just like meet new people, or any people, actually. It's always been sort of part of the like strategy of the gallery to travel and show at fairs alongside the program we have here. I think doing it sustainably is often the question, because sometimes, as Lisa says, you know, the project is like ultimately not commercially minded and might lean towards something else. And then you have to figure out how you do that, whether balancing that with the program at the gallery or like having additional works at the fair and making sure your year makes sense has been something that we've like done right from the beginning. But I also think there's always a little bit of a risk with these kind of things. And that's also maybe okay as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, Robbie, you were mentioning this like myth around growth and how it doesn't really apply in the way that at least it used to, if it ever really did. And then it's interesting to think about you, Lisa, having decided to open a second gallery location, which is unusual for a young or an emerging gallery. I'm curious, like, how you made the calculus of that being worth it, because that increases your overhead. And it also kind of goes against what we've been hearing, which is that the brick and mortar gallery doesn't matter as much. I mean, as Freddie was just saying, it's really about getting to the fairs. Freddie has you have a relatively small space in London. And Robbie, as I'll ask you in a minute, you know, you decide to go nomadic. And here you are, Lisa, kind of like opening a second space.
Yeah, I mean, this has many reasons. One of them is obviously that we are under pressure here politically. So we also had to do it because the situation in Georgia is very difficult politically. But also on the other hand, I have to say that people get extremely tired by fairs. And I know many people who are so annoyed by them, and I have the feeling there's a coming back to a different kind of looking at art. And it makes sense. I really encountered now that it makes a difference if you are in Cologne, for example, and you meet the people and you have a different time for conversations and different time to look at exhibitions and a program instead of these very short, especially at Basel, extremely short conversations with very little attention span from the collectors. And this is what we were successful with in Georgia, because people are coming and then they have time and they really come, though we are really in the periphery, but they do and they're interested and they take their time. And at Basel Paris, I have to say, the attention span of the visitors is so minimal. They will forget you immediately. So I figured that this actually being in these peripheral spaces and taking time and concentrating on maybe not so many people, but on a core amount of people which support you was beneficial for us so far. And it makes a difference if you're on site, definitely. Yeah.
That resonate with you, Robbie, in your experience of fairs? And also, how does that square with your decision to go nomadic?
Oh, I definitely agree with Lisa that I can sense that my audience, my collector base is getting tired of fairs. But I think it's primarily that they're bored. They're bored by the same offering. Fairs are flattening out. They're all looking the same. Gallery programs are starting to look the same. Of course, gallery spaces often look the same. I myself have a very difficult time wielding through all that content. I can't imagine what it is for collectors to be constantly bombarded week by preview after preview for this fair, that fair, this show, that. I mean, I would also opt out if I was a collector and try to engage differently. And this is really one of the deciding factors for the big announcement I made to go nomadic. After having locations in LA and Paris, small spaces, larger spaces, and really following the status quo expectation of a gallery's evolution from a small size space to a mid-tier gallery, I just felt like I have to be doing things differently to have my audience be engaged again. And I would say that the same goes not just for the exhibition program, but for the art fairs that we were participating in. I mean, there was a year, I think it was like 2017, when we did 8 fairs. And we felt at the time like, oh, this is so great. I don't think it, in hindsight, did much to, necessarily generate more sales. It just actually made it more difficult to get collectors' attentions. You can only follow up with another preview so many times in 1 year. But one of the things that I thought was interesting about Lisa's point about Art Basel Paris is I do think one of the challenges of that fair is that there's too much going on that week. First of all, the fair itself is huge. Then you have a city with a lot of gallery shows, a lot of museums, on top of restaurants and shopping, and Paris being Paris.
Paris is too much fun.
Paris is so much fun. A collector could spend the entire week there and still not see it all. Not as started a fair on top of course, Paris International. It's too much. Actually, someone asked if we would ever consider doing Basel Social Club in Paris. And I'm like, why?
Please don't.
No, there's no need to. That goes back to the question you asked about if we felt like there was a reason to do it in Basel. We thought, yeah, absolutely. Basel has the main fair, a few local galleries. Of course, there are great institutions, but otherwise, there's not that much going on. There's a handful of good restaurants, a few bars that people go to.
That's why I think for galleries, Basel Paris can never replace Basel.
Yeah.
I mean, this is impossible. You won't have the attention ever from curators and collectors in Basel Paris because too much is going on there. It's impossible.
Freddie, did you think about bringing a different kind of booth to Art Basel Paris than you did to Art Basel in Basel? And I know you can't quite comment on this yet since you haven't done Basel statements yet, but I'm curious how you thought about it.
We've also just been accepted into Basel Paris for the first time as well. So we're really Baseling out this year. It's a pretty similar premise. The booth has to be to apply and to get the attention of the people on the selection committee to take a really closer look and then accept your presentation. When you haven't done the fair before means it kind of has to be very specific. So we took a similar strategy. They're both large-scale sculptural installations. They're both with artists who are looking institutionally. And I think that that's perhaps the area that they sort of look to for these sections.
So there has been, a noted downturn in the market. I'm curious how you guys have been weathering this. What have you had to change about the way you're doing business? Because it's different from like a larger gallery, which can maybe lay off a bunch of staff or shut a location in Seoul or this kind of thing. Your stakes are completely different.
Well, I guess I can answer that because maybe my change is the most obvious. I literally had to change the model. It's obvious I had a pretty big overhead, large space in the Marais in Paris, in a city that's expensive, large staff. But one of the challenges I felt of having the fixed space location was the necessity to constantly program. Maybe if you have a gallery in a different city where people won't notice so much if you're quiet for a few months, but galleries in the Marais in Paris, you can't take a break. You constantly need to program. As we all know from experience, not every exhibition sells well. You might have one show that sells out, and you might have another show where nothing sells, frankly. And so any profit made from the show that sold only covers the deficit of the show that didn't work out. That might be okay, sustainable when the market is strong, but when the market is as slow as it has been, it can quickly put yourself into a challenging position where you're then scrambling. And I talk about this with all my colleagues who are like, I suddenly have to focus a certain percentage of my work week on secondary sales in a way that they never had to do before. And here I'm speaking specifically about colleagues who have galleries the age of my galleries, 10 years plus. I'm the veteran in the group here, so I've also experienced the market highs and lows, and also experienced running a gallery at a time when, before inflation, when costs were significantly less. I mean, the conversation about the market being slow on the flip side, or additionally rather, you have costs being more than they've ever been to just put on a show, shipping, a weekend in New York, production for anything. It's gone up so much. So you're working with a much narrower profit margin because the costs are so high. So what I've had to do is just be lean. And that's why I've chosen the nomadic model, because I can just be more flexible. Whenever I'm giving advice to younger galleries, what I tell them is stay as small as you can for as long as you can. Don't buy into the growth model. Even if you've had a great year, put the money aside, save it. Don't let your ego get ahead of you and feel like, okay, now I'm going to double down on a massive space or multiple locations, because it can get very tricky very fast. And that's the experience that I've spoken to with a lot of colleagues like me who maybe even got cocky and were like, okay, I'm ready to get big now, go big. It can really hinder you, really handicap you from even just covering your basic operational costs.
You bring up so many important points, one of which I should have maybe said at the top, is like the definition of the emerging market encompasses so many different kinds of galleries and such a span of years. And so, Freddie, maybe what about what Robbie's just said might resonate with you? You would be one of these galleries that would be starting at 5 years. The idea to stay small, is that something that you're particularly tacking towards?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're lean anyway. We're in an old loading bay. We used to be in an old sandwich shop. We're a staff of 2.5 on a good day. I work with just 8 artists. So it's kind of a lean model as it is. To counter some of Robbie's points, I do think that having the ambition for some growth is definitely important. The different steps you can do to keep that sustainable is just kind of what needs to be discussed, I guess, or like figured out. In London too, I think it's important to be consistently programming, and there's pressure associated with that. But I don't think 6 shows a year is that big of an ask. Yeah, it's about finding sustainability in some version of growth. I also do think growth is important, like when you're running a small business with ambitions of it being a medium or a large one.
Right. How does scaling work when it comes to your artists? Each of you have several artists on your programs that have experienced a lot of career success, and you're sharing them, I think, in each of your cases with some blue chip galleries at this point or some high mid-tier galleries. How do those relationships work out? I mean, I've heard, just to like stoke the fire, from some artists, like I went to a studio once and they're like, oh, this is for this, I will not name it, but blue chip gallery, they get first pick. How do you negotiate inventory and these relationships when you're sort of the little guy, so to speak?
The relationship, it says it all in that word. It's about how close you are with the artists. And I think a lot of galleries start off showing their friends, their peers. You already have that bond. There's, of course, certain things that a big gallery can do for an artist that a young gallery can't. But one of the things that a young gallery can do that a big gallery can't is just retain that connection, that intimacy, being able to maybe give advice creatively in the studio that an artist liaison from a blue chip gallery cannot give to that artist just because they don't have the same relationship. So as long as you're able to keep nurturing that and keep it healthy, of course, relationships with artists can also grow toxic. You'll probably be fine in the long run because your artists, if they're good people, will remain loyal to you and know that without you, they wouldn't be where they are. And so they will continue to offer the same inventory that they do to their bigger galleries.
Right. And the attitudes seem to be shifting around that too. I know like Hauser and Worth started this initiative where they're now working collaboratively with younger galleries, because I think at the top level, that also is finally recognized, exactly what you said, Robbie, as something valuable. I'm curious, Lisa or Freddie, do you have anything to add to that? And, maybe speaking a bit about how it affects prices too for an artist and how you kind of manage demand in that situation too.
I think just to bounce off Robbie's point, or like your point, Kate, if an artist is giving you the bad inventory, then like go and find another artist. Obviously, that's a simple answer, but I think that it's a two-way street, the relationship between you and the artist. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy working with the bigger galleries. I think it has its high points and, more difficult areas, but like it's also the name of the game, right? I don't think that stopping that from happening is really useful either. Like, I think that the broad reach and the ecosystems within those large-scale galleries can be really useful and like game-changing for artists' careers, and can also be game-changing for the small gallery too, because you sort of like get swept up, or a rising tides lifting all boats situation.
I think there's a new dynamic now in the market, which is difficult for smaller galleries. Normally, the young and smaller galleries are the one who are building up the artists and finding the artists, building up a relationship, put a lot of work into showing the artists, which I think is quite important. But now there's this new dynamic of mega galleries just picking up any young artist and having like certain almost like testing spaces where they're like seeing how the market is for the artist, how this works out, which I find is a really difficult development, because I think it's great to share artists. I think actually the best combination for an artist is to have a young gallery and a mega gallery or very successful gallery, because they both can do different things for the artist. But once the artist is like already picked up by a mega gallery, it's very rare that a young gallery will start working with them as well. Or maybe that's something which has to develop now. It's a very confusing development because the prices are so high already for this young artist. Then you bring, for example, an artist to Liste who's already like 30,000. That doesn't make any sense. So it's a very new dynamic, which I also try to understand a little bit. But I think it's a bit dangerous for young artists, because all of a sudden they can be buried in one of these big programs and nothing much will happen. But maybe that's just my observation from the last 2 years.
I think that development actually reflects the market trends, is that younger artists are selling better. The reason those big galleries are stacking so many younger artists is because their established artists aren't selling, and they need to feed their clients with young, fresh artists. And I think it can, as Lisa said, actually be a dead end for some young artists when their prices rise too quickly. It is a tricky balance. It's definitely something new that so many big galleries are stacking their rosters with so many young artists. That's something that I think has only happened in the last few years.
Just another pressure point to have to navigate. And again, it speaks to just this hollowing out of the middle market, by which we mean these mid-career artists where the demand is not there. Is it difficult having these conversations with your artists? Because I'm sure that the dollar signs, speak volumes, but you're trying to help them build organic and sustainable careers.
Yeah, I think they can be difficult, but they can also be really exciting. So it's sort of a mix in the middle. Most artists don't ever get an opportunity to show at a really, really large scale gallery. So that's also something to consider. I think Lisa said it best. I think having a combination of the both is obviously something that I, with the smallest gallery on this podcast, I'm definitely going to advocate for. But I also think that it can be really special for an artist to, feel seen and recognized too. I do also think that's an important part of the conversation.
If the artist has both, it's really healthy, I think, because younger galleries can do very different things with the artist, especially at fairs like Art Basel. Because when does an artist get a solo booth? This is just possible if a young gallery comes and does like premiere or statements or something. A bigger gallery can show one work of yours at Art Basel, and that's the attention it will get. To have both is very beneficial for a young artist.
That's a really good point.
A worse situation is when a young artist has too many galleries of the same size, because oftentimes, while they want to work in collaboration, they're all selling to the same people, and they're all kind of can do the same things for that artist. I think that that's a more challenging constellation than the young gallery, established gallery marriage.
Yeah, it's like a monoculture versus, a diverse crops in the field. It makes a lot of sense.
Especially when they're all in Europe. At least you can diversify geographically.
So we've talked a bit about the shift in buying patterns, but I wanted to ask you guys about this Art Basel market report fact that small dealers had the highest share of these quote unquote new buyers, that there's a growing appetite of millennials and Gen Z. So I'm curious, are you seeing new faces in the collecting world? And if so, who are they? And are they buying work differently than the previous generation?
Yes, they're buying differently. I think they're much safer with their buys. I think actually in some ways, let's say older millennials or Gen X were reckless with their money in a fun way. They just bought what they wanted. They bought crazy things, I think maybe younger millennials, I don't have a lot of Gen Z collectors, but let's say if they do exist, I think they're much more cautious in general. They're spending their money much more carefully. That's a bigger trend in general. Collectors, no matter what generation they're from, are proceeding with caution before shaking the hand on a sale. Things are slower, but I think that's the biggest thing that I've noticed.
Anything to add to that, Freddie?
Just because of how we started off, of course, our initial collector base was skewed slightly younger, slightly off-grid in how we operated. But I mean, since we've sort of shifted to freeze and now hopefully with Basel, like the Gen thing, what are the age brackets? I'm not so...
I just quietly Googled it, like Gen Z is up to 28 right now, so...
We have some nice collectors who are around 28, but we also have some really lovely collectors who are around 48, 68. I think that they buy differently. For sure, the younger collector is definitely more cautious, I think, in my experience. I completely agree with Robbie.
Are you meeting collectors on Instagram? Because there's this idea that exists that people, are enthusiastically buying work over Instagram and through PDFs, but then that there's this kind of loyalty issue that they're not necessarily like committing to the program in quite the same way, which goes against this idea that, in-person buying is back, which is what sort of I'm seeing. So which of these two things is more true for you?
I think actually the buying frenzy that happened during COVID because people were forced to online shop is actually what contributed to the market slowdown, because they didn't see works in person and probably purchased works that they regretted buying just via JPEG or Instagram. And that's one of the reasons why collectors are a little bit more cautious, because it was too much online buying, let's say. I've noticed that that's actually slowed down a little bit. There was a FIAC online viewing room fair that replaced the physical FIAC fair during COVID that we did exceptionally well at, sold everything to people I'd never met before. It was weird. That was, I think, an indication of the buying habits of the COVID years. That's definitely slowed down.
What about for you, Lisa? Do you feel like online sales or social media routed networking is important?
We started with that. I mean, we were dependent on that. Nobody came to Georgia at the beginning. So we are selling everything kind of online, rather through a PDF and an email conversation than through social media. But that is actually something which changed drastically. I think with this also slowing economy, this is something we really feel. So I have the feeling I have to travel much more to visit people, not necessarily for fairs, but really to see people, to have a conversation with people, to talk to them about the work rather than having it just on email conversation. So yeah, this is the biggest change for us, really.
You've each made very sort of different bets on how to build a gallery, which I think is really interesting. Looking ahead, in a line or two, say, what's one thing that you think really needs to change in the art industries for emerging galleries to continue to thrive? We'll do a fire round.
I will start because, as I mentioned before, when I opened my gallery in 2013, we really abided by what we felt was the one and only way to grow and do things. And in hindsight, I wish that I had stuck to my guns a little bit more, done things the way I wanted to do, which is partially what I'm doing now, is kind of finding my freedom to say, actually, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to listen to my guts. And if I don't want to have a physical space, I'm not going to have a physical space. And if I want to travel around and do things in different places without always feeling like I need to man the shop, I'm going to do it. And I think that this is what all young galleries should just feel encouraged to do, is do it your way. Don't look at the generation of galleries who grew from small spaces like in the 90s to who they are today, because they grew at a time when the rent was cheap and shipping was cheap, and they were not competing with blue chip galleries to show young artists like the way we are. The terms that they had were so much easier to grow. And these are the galleries that sit on the selection committees of these fairs and judiciously select the young galleries that get shown there, ascribing the same growth model that they had to us when the landscape is completely different. So I would say, don't try to please the status quo. Just know that you have the freedom and the autonomy to run a gallery however you want to. That's the only way this is going to work, because if we all also become cookie cutter versions of one another, that's actually what is creating a bit of this problem of a redundant situation.
That's a great point. Lisa, what about you? Something that needs to change, or a parting word of advice?
It's an economy, so you have to see what works for you. I'm an advocate for the periphery. It works very well for us. I think you have to find your niche, what is interesting and what still makes sense. It doesn't make sense to copy something, as Robbie said, which is already there since years, and you have a lot of the same systems. And I think you should find your own pace and your own place in this economy.
Someone's opening a gallery in 2025. What would you tell them that you learned in the last 5 years?
Don't open the gallery. No. Sorry.
That question was directed to Freddie, right?
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I think what Lisa was saying about economies and things, these are questions that I can't answer because I'm not a politician. I think rent control and structural changes to how you can open and run a small shop business specifically, and there are specific things related to that, and the art economy specifically within the UK, which I know, is very not Europe anymore, so has its very own specific set of rules, needs reform and needs changing. And that is kind of above my pay grade. I think there are these big issues that hinder a lot of people from being able to open a business. And then there are these questions about sustainability. And I think I'm still figuring those out.
Lest we forget that it's an entrepreneurship just like any other, and that's as vulnerable as any other right now in this economy. Well, Thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and I really thank you all for your candor today. So I wish you all the best in Basel next week in all the various places that we'll find you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you,
Thank
Freddie
you.
and Lisa.
You too.
Yes.
Yes.
That's it for this week's episode. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, take a moment to rate and review us. It will help other listeners discover what we're doing. The Art Angle is produced by Sonia Manalili with contributions from myself, Ben Davis, Carolyn Goldstein, and Naomi Ray. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.